So yesterday we spoke about some interesting things regarding a esrog that was the right size, but it shrunk. And what was the reason why an esrog would need to be a certain size? So the understanding in the Gemara was that it had to be a certain size because we have to make sure that its growth process has been completed. But yesterday we saw that even though it reached the right size, if it got smaller, if it shrunk, the Trumas Hadeshen holds that it's not valid anymore. What would the reason be for it not to be valid if it was valid before? Now that it shrunk, it obviously reached its correct size because it was valid for the first 3 days of Sukkot, let's say, and then it shrunk on the third day. So now you want to use it on the fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, and seventh day. And the problem is it's below the size, but you'll say, who cares if it's below this? The size was just to prove that it reached its final growth stage. So now that it shrunk, it doesn't go back in time. It's not like it didn't reach its growth. It reached its full growth. So what would the reason be for it not to be valid? Why is the Trumas Hadeshen holding that it's not valid? And so yesterday we explained that there could be an additional problem, even though the Gemara at one point emphasizes that the problem was that it was not finished its growth. And that's why if it's too small, it won't be a kosher esrog, but it could be that that reason was the only reason why it's not valid, only followed one view. But the other view there held that there could be an additional reason why a small esrog is not valid. And that additional reason would be the reason why the Trumas Hadeshen is holding that it's not valid if an esrog shrinks. What would that additional reason be? Seemingly, it would be based on that Gemara there, which gave this implication and gave this assumption initially, is that there could be a problem of it not being beautiful, that a certain size makes it a beautiful thing. If it's too small, it's no longer beautiful. There's the emaciated things that don't look nice. And then there's the too big that might not look nice. And somewhere in the middle is what looks nice, hadar. So it says pre-8 had. So it could be it's a problem if it's too small that it doesn't look like it's grown properly. It has so if an esrog shrinks, it could also fall into that category that it's not beautiful anymore. So even though it finished its full growth process, but the fact that it's a small size could be a problem of being hadar. And so the Trumas Hadeshen seems to follow this way. And based on that, the Bach, or along those lines, I should say, maybe not based on that, but along the lines of the Trumas Hadeshen's way of thinking, the Bach also also understands the Gemara to be that way, that there's an additional problem in some of those cases. And therefore, that you could have a case that would not be kosher, even though it's not a problem of the growth hasn't finished. And what would that case be? The case would be if it's green. It's the same thing with the Bach talks about a case where it's green. If it's green, even though it's going to be good, like Tosfos says, that's going to become yellow, but and therefore you can't say it's not finished its growth process. It did complete its growth. Nevertheless, there could be an additional problem that while it's green, it's not beautiful anymore. So therefore, the Bach wants to say that a green esrog would actually not be like the way Tosfos is understanding it, that the only problem is that it's not grown completely, but that there's an additional problem of hadar. And the same thing is what the Trumas Hadeshen says regarding the size. So the Bach talks about the color, and the Trumas Hadeshen talks about the size. Now, we did have other opinions about the color, and they mentioned that they want to follow the other view, which basically seems to be implied from Tosfos. And that other view holds that the fact that it gets yellow is going to be a sign that it's fine, that it's kosher. And we mentioned that the source that they bring for this is a Magen Avram and Taz both say this, And the source that's brought is from the Maharil, who says that you should not take a green esrog because maybe it's going to stay that color. However, he says if it started getting a little less green, then it is kosher. And obviously, the reason why he holds that is because he doesn't think that there's an issue of hadar, of beauty, because if there was an issue of hadar, it doesn't help that it gets a little, that it's, you see that it's turning yellow. It would have to be fully yellow in order not to be a problem of that it's not beautiful. And therefore, obviously, the Maharil holds that the only problem of a green esrog is that it might not be finished its growth process. And therefore, once it's starting, shows that you see that it's starting to turn, it begins turning a little different color. So then you would be allowed to use it. And it obviously is only an issue of that you need to prove that it finished its growth. And this would prove that it finished its growth. So that's the other way of understanding, which comes out a difference in halacha, seemingly. Would you be allowed to use a green esrog? This seems to be the machlekes here.
Shape of it. So usually.
Okay, I did want to mention one more thing. Let me mute everyone here. I did want to mention one more thing. In the Mishnah, we did speak about, going back a drop, but the Mishnah on page Lamed Dalet Amud Beis on page 34b, which is our Mishnah, it did talk about the case of a too big, if an esrog is too large. And esrog that's too large, we said, what is that maximum size? And so the first opinion was that you need to be able to hold 2 esrogim in one shot. You should be able to hold 2 in your hand. And we learned about that as well earlier. This is Rabbi Yehuda's view. And Rabbi Yossi said even 1 esrog in 2 hands. You could have it that big. So we learned this before, and we spoke about what's the reason if it's too big, what would the problem be? And the Gemara's conclusion was, well, the Gemara initially said maybe it's because of hadar. It has to be beautiful. If it's too big, it's not hadar. And the Gemara's conclusion is that no, the problem is you're supposed to hold the lulav in your right hand and the esrog in your left hand. And what happens if you, by mistake, picked up the esrog in your right hand and your lulav in your left hand? You're going to need to switch them. Now, if it's too big, it's going to end up falling. And that's going to be a problem. Make it puzzle. You're not going to have another esrog, whatever the concern exactly, however precisely you want to word the concern, but it has to do with the esrog falling, and it's basically not going to be valid. Now, so that's why if it's too big, that was the Gemara's conclusion, that it's going to become puzzle. Osui la'apuchinhu and osi la'afsule. It's going to end up becoming invalid. And that was, again, on the Gemara, that same Gemara that we've been quoting on page 31. So our Mishnah, interestingly enough, the Mishnah's wording is that you have to be able to hold two esrogim in one hand. You have to be able to hold 2 esrogim in one hand. The commentaries, at least one of the commentaries, doesn't like that term. He says, why do you need to hold 2 esrogim in one hand? He says there's an earlier version of that word, the different wording in the Mishnah that fits a lot better. He says that kedei sheyoiches shnehem, not shnayim. He adds the letter hey, in order that you can hold both of them. Shnehem. So it's a difference of 1 letter. If you could hold both of them, it means can you hold the lulav and the esrog in one hand? Because when you switch hands, you're going to have to hold them both at some point in one hand to switch them. And therefore, that's the meaning. It's not about holding 2 esrogim in one hand. It's about holding 1 esrog and 1 lulav, meaning hold both of them. That's the wording of Rabbi Yehuda. So it's not about being able to hold 2 esrogim in one hand, that you should be able to hold 1 lulav and 1 esrog. Should be able to hold the lulav and the esrog in one hand, both of them, not two esrogim. So that's another understanding of the Mishnah. And then Rabbi Yossi, he says, even afilu echad b'shtei yadav. Now, the way we translated it was even one esrog b'shtei yadav, in your two hands. According to this earlier version, it's afilu b'shtei yadav. In other words, it skips out that word echad. Those three letters are removed. And that would mean that Rabbi Yossi says, even b'shtei yadav, that as long as you could hold one esrog in one hand, in one lulav in one hand, you're all set. Meaning you don't have to, doesn't mean even if you could hold two in one hand, two hands to hold an esrog. No, he doesn't say that. Even one esrog in two hands. That's the version of our Mishnah that we have. But according to the earlier version that they found in the earlier, texts of the Gemara, of the Mishnah, they found that earlier text has it. Rabbi Yossi says, even b'shtei yadav, even if you hold the lulav and the esrog in two hands, which basically means one lulav and one esrog, each in their own hands. You don't have to be able to hold them both in one hand. You could hold them both in two hands, meaning one hand for the esrog and one hand for the lulav. And that would be understandable that you need to be able to hold them all together at the same time. What it seems to me is these two girsais, these two earlier versions, might be connected to the argument that we saw in an earlier Tosfos. We had a Tosfos earlier on that talked about, can you shake the lulav on its own, and then shake the hadassim on their own, and then shake the aravais on their own, then shake the esrog on its own, or not? Do you need to shake them all at once? And I mentioned to you that there is a practical side to that, where people are, someone is handicapped, or is one hand is paralyzed, and so on. And the question was, would you be able to shake the lulav, each one individually? And we mentioned that there was an argument in Tosfos. Tosfos didn't like that idea, that option of shaking it each one individually, but the Bahag said it's okay, it's fine. And so this Mishnah, the conclusion of our Mishnah, seems to be connected to those two opinions, depending on the version that we just said now, based on that version. Why? Because according to Rabbi Yossi's statement, the way our Mishnah says it, even one with two hands, that means you would have one esrog you're holding in two hands, and you're going to be able to fulfill the mitzvah. Obviously, that opinion of Rabbi Yossi is following the view, is going along the lines of what we said according to the Bahag. The Bahag is following that understanding, that you're going to be holding the esrog with two hands. You're not holding that lulav with it. It's impossible. You're holding an esrog with two hands. Where are you fitting the lulav? It must be that you're going to be shaking them individually. And that would fit with the Bahag's view. But according to the view that Tosfos says, would seem to fit with the other view, where Rabbi Yossi says, "Afilu b'shtei yadav," even if you have an esrog that takes up your entire left hand, and a lulav that takes up your entire right hand, that's going to be kosher, but not more than that, which means that you need to shake them all at once, and you're going to be shaking them, and it's fine. Okay, maybe there's a concern about one of them dropping. That was that would be Rabbi Yehuda's concern, but Rabbi Yossi's not worried about dropping them. But you do need at least to be able to handle each one in one hand. So your lulav, including the hadassim and the aravais in your right hand, the esrog, including the esrog on it, full can take up your full left hand, and that would be okay. Why? Because you need to shake them all at the same time. So that would seem to fit with this version of the Gemara. That would be Tosfos. So it would be interesting to to see if that was the girsa, that was the version that each of them had, because then it would flow very well why they're convinced of their opinions. But it was based on that difference in the girsa, maybe. Just a thought that comes to mind. Okay. So that was going over a little of what we did yesterday, and then the Gemara that we learned yesterday, the new Gemara, was mentioning Rav Asi's statements. And Rav Asi spoke about cases that are an argument between Reb Meir and the Chachamim. What was the basis of this argument between Reb Meir and the Chachamim? What were the cases? Let's start with the cases. What are the cases? So this is the Gemara on the bottom of Lamed Hey Amud Aleph. This is the Gemara on the bottom of 35a that we did yesterday, and it brought Rav Asi's statement in full. He talks about an esrog of Meiser Sheni, that Reb Meir would say you can't fulfill the mitzvah. The rabbis say you can fulfill the mitzvah. It's an esrog that was supposed to be eaten in Yerushalayim to rejoice over Hashem's produce that he gave you, the kindness that Hashem gave you, the land and produce and so on. And that's the second tithing. It's a tithing that you are able to enjoy, but it's about thinking about Hashem's gift. And that esrog that was supposed to be eaten in Yerushalayim, you decide, let me also use it for my esrog that I'm going to do the mitzvah with. Maybe afterwards I'll eat it. But now let me do the mitzvah with it and shake lulav and esrog with that esrog. And I guess it makes sense. You're bringing it to Yerushalayim anyway to eat there. Why not use it first for the mitzvah, and then I don't have to carry an extra esrog? In the old days, they didn't have cars or things. But in any event, that's the case. You took this esrog of Meiser Sheni and you want to use it for the mitzvah. And then you'll eat it afterwards. You'll fulfill it. You're not going to, you're not doing anything wrong. You're gonna use it afterwards for the mitzvah of eating Meiser Sheni. But in the meantime, you want to use it for the mitzvah. So this is an argument for Meir and the rabbis. And then what is the next case? Matzah of Meiser Sheni. What about matzah? So you have matzah that's Meiser Sheni. It's supposed to be eaten in Yerushalayim. And you say, you know what? It's Pesach now. And I'm in Yerushalayim. Let me eat the matzah. Eat the matzah. And I'll fulfill two things. Kill two birds with one stone. I'll get the mitzvah of eating Meiser Sheni and the mitzvah of eating matzah. As it's being fulfilled as it's supposed to. It's going to be eaten in Yerushalayim, and I'll get the mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach night. So this also is going to be an argument. Reb Meir says you can't do it, and the rabbis say yes, you fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah. What about Isa of Meiser Sheni, a dough of Meiser Sheni? That your question is, do you take challah from it? The dough of Meiser Sheni, it's a dough. You made a dough. It's supposed to be eaten in Yerushalayim. This doesn't have to be matzah. It could be chametz. It could be challah. You have the dough. And the question is, do you separate the challah? You separate that portion for the kohen from this dough. It's called the separation of challah. It doesn't have to be challah. Even matzah you need to separate challah from the matzah. You have to separate a portion of the dough, but the term is to separate challah. So it's chayiv in challah according to the rabbis, but according to Reb Meir, it's exempt. What's the reason? What's the basis of this argument? So it boils down. The main argument is, what is Meiser Sheni? These are all three cases about the second tithing that you're supposed to eat in Yerushalayim. When you're eating that in Yerushalayim, are you eating your produce that you're supposed to do a mitzvah with? Or are you eating Hashem's produce that he's inviting you to participate in his meal and his food? That's really what the argument is. Reb Meir says this Meiser Sheni is not yours. It's Hashem's. It grew on your tree, but it's not yours. Hashem says, listen, I'm growing your tree for you. I'm producing your fruit for you. I'm making it grow. I gave you your land. I gave you your life. I gave you your freedom, and I'm giving you the fruits on your tree. But guess what? Uh, Part of it is mine. This is Reb Meir's opinion. The second tithing, Meiser Sheni, that's mine. But you know what? I'm going to let you rejoice with me and participate and make a festivity, make a ceremony in Yerushalayim. You can enjoy it. You're going to have a party, and I want to invite you. You can eat from it, and so that's Reb Meir's opinion, that you eat from the Meiser Sheni, but you're eating from Hashem's food. Now, when it's Hashem's food, that means that there are certain mitzvahs you're not going to be able to fulfill with it because it's not yours. And there are certain mitzvahs that have to be yours. And one of the most famous mitzvahs that has to be yours, the most famous one, I think, is the mitzvah of lulav. Where else do you have a case where you tell someone, this is a gift on the condition that you give it back to me? The case is lulav. You know, when you hear the shofar, you don't have to own the shofar. So the guy who blows it, he blows the shofar. You don't have to own it. He doesn't have to say matana al manas lahachzir, a gift. But when it comes to lulav, you have to own your lulav. It's one of the famous cases where you tell someone, this is a gift that I'm giving you. You own it for these moments until you return, and the condition you return it. And so the argument between Reb Meir and the rabbis is going to be very applicable on any mitzvah that has to be done with something that you own. This will be applicable to Meiser Sheni produce, because Reb Meir says this is Hashem's produce. The rabbis say, no, it's not Hashem's produce. Hashem gave you the tree, let you grow. He gives you the fruits. He produces the fruits. And he says, I want you to do some things with my fruits. One of the things is give tithings to the kohen, to the Levi, to the poor person. Another thing I want you to do on the first year, the second year, on the first year, the second year, the fourth year, and the fifth year, I want you to take it to Yerushalayim, and I want you to eat the second tithing. It's yours, but I want you to eat a second. I want you to do it in Yerushalayim and rejoice. And so that, according to the rabbis, is called yours. It's considered yours, but you do have certain rules that Hashem tells you it's yours, but I want you to eat in Yerushalayim. I have certain rules about it. You can't, you want to redeem it and use it, buy something else with it. There are rules about it, but it's called yours. If it's called yours, then you could fulfill certain mitzvahs with it, and that's the argument between Reb Meir and the rabbis. Now, if you hold that Meiser Sheni, if you hold that the esrog needs to have a din mammon, it has to have a value that you could. Meiser Sheni has a heter achila. It has a permit to eat. But does Meiser Sheni, is it considered a monetary value to you? So according to Reb Meir, you don't have a monetary value to it. And therefore, the esrog of Meiser Sheni is going to be a problem. Because if it needs to be, according to the way Ravasi is understanding it, you need to have a monetary value to be considered that you own it. And because of that, you won't fulfill the mitzvah with an esrog of Meiser Sheni. So anyway, so the bottom line is we have these three cases where we have three cases where is an argument, Reb Meir and the rabbis, about if you are considered owning it, or is it considered Hashem's. Are you enjoying from Hashem's produce? What's interesting is that the other view does hold that since you have a heter achila, it's considered yours, even though it's called mammon gavoya. It's still considered. You don't need to be. It doesn't have to have a din mammon. In other words, the fact that it's yours that you could eat, even though it's considered mammon gavoya. I guess this is an interesting concept that it's called mammon gavoya. According to the other opinion, it's called mammon gavoya, but it's still considered yours. He doesn't hold you need this din mammon, that it has a monetary value. It's Hashem's, but you could still call it lachem. It's a little interesting that we're going to call it lachem, according to the other view. It doesn't need a din mammon. That's a interesting, deserves a little thought, something I'm going to have to think about, how that view understands it. Because seemingly Reb Meir would say this is Hashem's, it's not yours at all. Why does it need, why is that good enough? The fact that you could eat it, why would that be good enough to be called lachem?
Rabbi, is that similar to saying a bracha on food? That it's not yours until you say the bracha on the food?
Similar, yeah. Yeah, it's a similar idea, yeah. Hashamayim, shamayim la Hashem, it says. Yeah, it's the heavens is va'aretz nasan l'bnei yadam. You know, it's um that's the concept, is that it's right, that it's not yours until you say a bracha. Similar idea that it's Hashem's. It's just very interesting that we're going to say that this is good enough, that you don't need a din mammon, and that's good enough. Ein ba din mammon. You know, just because you can eat it, that's considered lachem. You know.
Well, if you can't do anything else with it, it obviously is not yours.
That's fine. What about the other way of thinking? It's mammon gavoya. Reb Meir says mammon gavoya, but you could eat it. So we're calling it lochem? Like that's good enough? That's called yours? You don't really own it.
But for the purpose of what you need to do with it, to be Mekayim the mitzvah,
But it says lochem.
it is yours. Because for that you are permitted to do, to eat. You can't step on it. You can't destroy it. You have, I would argue, there's a good argument that if it's to meet the particular need of the mitzvah, you're allowed to do that, then for that purpose, it is lochem. If it was, even I would even argue, like with the esrog, you said, even to waive it, that's not within the need of what you're granted the right to do by Hashem. But if it's that directly related, I think you can make a better argument.
I guess why it's surprising is because we don't really follow this understanding. We hold like the chachamim that it's yours, that it's called mammon shaloi. So in other words, for us, it's a little, this is an opinion that we're not really following, and we're not concerned.
We don't have to
we're trying to explain.
have to go through this exercise.
I'm saying not that we don't have to go through the exercise, which is true, but it's that, in other words, which is if you want to learn halacha, you don't have to go through this exercise. But the point is that we're not familiar with this exercise because this is a view that's not accepted in the halacha, because we follow the rabbis, and it's called mammon hedyet. It's called your money, and so we understand the esrog has to be mamish, has to be yours. But there is such an understanding that the lochem is good enough. The fact that you can eat it, it's considered lochem. It's interesting. But anyway, the opinion of Rav Asi is that if it's that it has to also be yours, that you own a monetary value of it. And according to Rav Asi, the fact that Rav Meir holds that it's considered Hashem's, it means you cannot fulfill the mitzvah of esrog with a Meiser Sheni esrog. And that's what the Gemara had said, and it's compared three cases: matzah, esrog, matzah, and isa. Esrog was a simple case. The matzah was a case where you want to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah on the first night, and the third case is the isa. You want to know if you have to separate challah. Those were the three cases, and all three cases boil down to this argument of Reb Meir and the Chachamim. It has to be yours. And the question is it yours? If it's Meiser Sheni, Reb Meir holds it's not yours. The Chachamim hold it's yours. And that's the conclusion of that statement. And then the Gemara has a discussion about it, because the Gemara asks that Rav Papa asked the question. He says, Isa, by dough, it does say Reishis Arisei Sechem. So you got to make sure that it's your dough. And interesting, we asked yesterday what would happen if it's dough of shutvim, of partners, because we know by an esrog owned by partners is not kosher to fulfill the mitzvah of esrog. So what would be the law by a isa, by dough owned by partners? And it's interesting because according to halacha, the dough owned by partners is going to be obligated in challah. So there's actually you might call it a discrepancy here, like a contradiction, because why is, if we hold you need to own your lulav, your esrog, it has to be yours, and if it's owned by partners, it's not valid. And we're basically saying the same thing about matzah and about isa. We're saying the same thing applies to matzah. Matzah has to be yours. And the same thing applies to dough. The dough has to be your dough to be obligated in challah. So seemingly they should all have the same laws. And the Rishonim asked this question. So we asked it yesterday. It turns out that it's actually asked by the commentaries. And what they explain, the Rashbam and Baba Basra asked this, and as well as the Ra'ah. And bottom line is, they say that there's a limud, there's some extra way of learning, that the wording in the law of dough includes also if it's owned by partners. So even though seemingly they both are the same, that they both have to be yours, but there is a slight difference between the different laws. The law of esrog, that it has to be fully yours, and if you're owning your partnership, it's a problem. In the law of dough, that even if you're a partner in dough, you still are obligated to separate challah. So that's just an interesting difference, that if you just learn the Gemara straight, it sounds like they're all exactly the same, but it's not so. There is slight difference between these two rules, and it's based on the way the pasuk hints to this. Arisai sechem, a plural, or there's some other way of learning it either specifically because it says Arisai Sechem, or because esrog would need to say pre-eitz hadarchem to include shutvim. But bottom line is that the partnership of an esrog makes the esrog invalid to fulfill the mitzvah. You need to have it as a gift to you, and you own it, solely you. But by a dough, if your partner's on a dough, you would be obligated separating challah. So getting back to our Gemara now. So the Gemara had asked a question, Rav Papa asked, that when it says Isa, when it talks about dough in the Torah, that you have to separate challah, we all do this even today. We don't give it to the kohen, but this is done. Even if a man makes dough, he has to. Some people think only women have to separate challah. It's really a mitzvah for men as well. Whoever makes the dough has to separate challah. Now, the dough. So the pasuk says Reishis Arisai Sechem, and we learn from there that it has to be yours. It's got to be your dough. It uses the term shelachem. The chaf mem at the end teaches us that it means yours. It has to be your dough. And according to Reb Meir, Meister Sheni dough is not yours, it's Hashem's. According to the Chachamim, it is yours. So this would be a case of an argument. But it says it over there by Arisai Sechem, by Isa, we know it has to be yours. Esrog Nami, Ksiv, Lachem. Esrog also, it says Lachem, it has to be yours. Because it says, Ulakachtem Lachem. It says Lachem. So we know it has to be yours. Mishalochem, and that would be a reason why Reb Meir would say this is not valid if it's a Meiser Sheni Esrog. The rabbis would say it's fine because you own your Meiser Sheni. Reb Meir says you don't own your Meiser Sheni because it's really Hashem's. You're allowed to eat it, but it's not yours. And the Gemara asks, but what about the third case? Ela matzah miksiv matzaschem, when it talks about eating matzah on Pesach night by the Seder, where there's a obligation. This is not just a extra bonus to eat matzah like there is throughout Pesach. According to many opinions, there's an extra mitzvah to eat matzah on Pesach. But the mitzvah on Pesach night is an obligatory mitzvah. It's not just an extra one. And that matzah on Pesach night by the Seder, does it say lochem? It says it has to be yours. Matzaschem doesn't say that. Miksiv matzaschem. Amar Rabba Bar Shmuel. So Rabba Bar Shmuel said the name of Rabbi Yema Bar Shlemya. There's a Gzeira Shava. We learn from the law of Challah that it says lechem lechem. Gzeira Shava. You learn that they need to have lochem, just like by the laws of Challah. You need to have lochem. It has to be yours in order to be obligated. Arisai sechem, your dough. So the same thing applies to the matzah, that it needs to be mishalochem and not meiser sheni. Can't be meiser sheni. So just like we exclude meiser sheni from the according to Reb Meir, that you're in other words, this limud obviously is applicable to Reb Meir, because Reb Meir is the one who's prohibiting it. Where does he get this from? That it needs to be yours, and it doesn't work if it's Meiser Sheni. It's because Meiser Sheni is not yours. In matzah, it needs to be yours because of a Gzeira Shava lechem.